They thought I was nothing more than a shadow clinging to their wealth. My mother-in-law banned me from family holidays, told everyone I was unworthy, and even turned me into a laughingstock online with a cruel meme. My husband stood by her side, silent, complicit. They believed I had no voice, no power, no place. But silence is a weapon, and mine was sharper than they could ever imagine. Because while they mocked me as an outsider, I was quietly building an empire. And one day, when the doors they shut swung open, every stone belonged to me. When I first stepped into the mansion, I thought I had crossed into a dream. The marble floors gleamed like polished water, the chandeliers rained gold, and every hallway smelled of roses carefully imported from Europe. Daniel held my hand tightly, his smile reassuring. "They'll love you," he whispered. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that marrying into his world meant I could belong somewhere new, somewhere powerful, somewhere stable. But Margaret's eyes cut sharper than crystal. She didn't look at me as her son's wife. She looked at me as an intruder. Her smile was tight, her pearls straining at her throat as she said, "So this is the girl." The word girl landed heavy, like a warning. I laughed it off. I told myself it was nerves, that she simply didn't know me yet. I tried to prove I could be gracious, helpful, even invisible, if that's what it took. I cooked for them. I complimented her taste in art. I attended the charity luncheons where women whispered behind napkins but smiled to my face. I thought if I endured long enough, her walls would soften. But the walls only thickened. Margaret spoke in half sentences designed to slice. Daniel could have married someone more established. Or, it must be strange for you stepping so high above your upbringing. Daniel never corrected her. He never defended me. Sometimes he looked away, as if embarrassed, not of her words, but of me. Then came the announcement. We were in the sitting room, sunlight spilling across velvet curtains, when Margaret cleared her throat. "The family holiday this summer will be at the estate in Newport," she said with authority, as though she were addressing a boardroom. Then her gaze fixed on me. "You won't be attending." The air dropped cold. Daniel froze, pretending to sip his coffee. My chest ached, but I forced my lips into a thin smile. "Of course," I said, my voice even, steady. I would not give her the pleasure of my protest. Inside, though, I felt something fracture. That night, I lay awake next to Daniel. He slept easily, untroubled, while my mind spun. It was not just exclusion. It was exile. I was not family in her eyes. I was temporary, disposable, a mistake to be erased. But if Margaret believed silence meant weakness, she misunderstood me entirely. Silence can be observation. Silence can be a ledger of every insult, every slight, every move of the enemy. And I was watching. Weeks passed. I played my role well, the quiet wife, the outsider who didn't argue. But in the quiet hours of night, I scrolled through my phone and saw something strange spreading across the internet. At first, it was a video clip, 30 seconds long, a bizarre AI creation of a woman with exaggerated features speaking gibberish in an over-the-top Italian accent. People laughed, tagged their friends, reshared it endlessly. The caption read, "The Gold Digger Bride." The caricature bore an uncanny resemblance to me. The sharp jawline, the long dark hair, even the emerald earrings Daniel had given me as a wedding gift, replicated with cruel precision. At first I laughed it off, told myself it was coincidence. But then more videos surfaced, each one more pointed, more vicious. A meme trend was born, mocking the outsider bride, the artless pretender. My face, distorted, exaggerated, humiliated, became the punchline of a joke I hadn't written. Everywhere I turned, strangers were laughing at me. In cafes, I saw teenagers holding up their phones, giggling at the caricature. At a charity gala, one of the women leaned close to Margaret and whispered, "She looks just like that meme." And they both smirked. Daniel shrugged it off. "It's just the internet, it'll pass." But he didn't understand. This wasn't random, this was orchestrated. One evening, while scrolling, I found a small watermark hidden in one of the clips, a company logo, one owned by Margaret's conglomerate. My stomach clenched. This wasn't coincidence. She had weaponized technology itself, turned AI into her blade, and I was the target. My mother-in-law hadn't just barred me from her holidays, she had declared war. For weeks after the meme spread, I carried myself like a ghost in their house. I lowered my voice. I smiled when spoken to. I let Margaret's barbs slice without a flinch. At dinners, when she made a joke at my expense, I simply nodded and sipped my wine. To them, I looked beaten down, a woman too fragile to fight back. Daniel didn't notice the way I measured every silence. He thought my quiet was surrender. "She only wants what's best for us," he told me one evening, as if he were a mediator, not my husband. "Mother has a reputation to protect. This is her way of defending it." His words burned worse than her insults. He wasn't protecting me. He was excusing her. But the more they dismissed me, the easier it became to move unseen. Margaret believed she had pushed me to the margins. She didn't realize the margins are where strategy is born. I visited the estate in Newport under the guise of checking on the decorators. They assumed I was running errands, an obedient daughter-in-law desperate to please. What they didn't know was that months earlier, I had signed contracts through a shell company, quietly transferring ownership of the property into my name. Every signature, every notarized page had been done under their noses. That day, when I touched the brass key in my pocket, I almost laughed. The house they barred me from was already mine. I played my role flawlessly. At family gatherings, I stayed in the background. Margaret smirked at her victory. Daniel shook his head at my supposed passivity, and the aunts whispered that I was fading away. But beneath their gaze, I was building. I poured myself into a project no one in their world cared to notice. I had spent years sketching, editing, experimenting with short-form stories. Now, with the explosion of vertical dramas, 60-second emotional hits designed for endless scrolling, I saw an opening. I formed a company not under my married name, but under the brand I had carried long before I was Mrs. Whitmore. The nights were long, lit by the glow of my laptop, my phone buzzing with calls to young actors hungry for a break, editors willing to gamble on me. I financed the pilot episodes myself, every cent drawn from savings Margaret didn't even know existed. To her, I was still the broke outsider. To me, I was investing in the one thing money couldn't fake: vision. The first series was raw, a story of betrayal and survival told in fractured images and cliffhanger endings. It wasn't polished. It wasn't safe. But it spread like wildfire. Millions watched, then tens of millions. Comments flooded in. Finally, something real. Finally, someone understands. My quiet war had gone public. I watched Margaret's expression the evening her favorite news channel ran a segment on the revolutionary new vertical series, Breaking Global Records. She didn't recognize the brand name on screen, didn't know the company was mine. But I saw the twitch in her jaw when the anchor said the valuation had skyrocketed into the hundreds of millions. The irony was intoxicating. While she plotted memes to humiliate me, I had launched a narrative empire. While she measured status and invitations to exclusive holidays, I was rewriting how the world consumed story. One morning, Daniel shoved a newspaper across the breakfast table. "Have you seen this?" he asked, his brow furrowed. The headline screamed, "Startup CEO Outpaces Legacy Conglomerates." I glanced at the article, my face nowhere in sight, only the logo of my company. I shrugged. "The world is changing," I said. He didn't hear the double edge in my words. It was then I realized Margaret wasn't my enemy anymore. She was small compared to what I was building. She had power in one house, one family name. I was building a currency of attention that stretched across continents. And yet I didn't reveal my hand. Not yet. Let them believe I was powerless. let them laugh at the caricature they had manufactured. The longer they underestimated me, the sweeter the truth would taste. Late that night, I checked the market again. The numbers climbed higher. My company now valued beyond the Whitmore fortune. I sat back, the weight of silence wrapping around me like armor. Margaret had barred me from her estate, stripped me of dignity in front of strangers, but soon she would understand that the home she worshipped, the empire she guarded, and the future she thought she controlled, all of it had already shifted into my grasp. For a brief moment, I thought I had broken free. My company's growth was unstoppable. Every vertical series pulling in millions of views, every investor desperate to be a part of my vision. The silence I had endured became my secret strength, and now it felt like the tide had turned in my favor. But Margaret was never a woman who accepted defeat. She had built her empire not by chance, but by outmaneuvering every rival who dared cross her path. And now, I was no longer just her disapproved daughter-in-law. I was a threat. The first strike came quietly, almost invisibly. A handful of new AI-generated singers exploded onto the scene, releasing music videos that felt hypnotic, addictive, impossible to ignore. At first, I thought they were harmless distractions, but soon, I realized every lyric, every distorted voice, every glitchy face was built around the same theme: mocking women who didn't belong, who faked success, who married into power they hadn't earned. The message was unmistakable. It was me. Suddenly, every corner of the internet was poisoned. A ballad that painted the outsider bride as a parasite climbed the charts. Clips of AI-crafted women with my likeness, distorted, sneering, circulated with captions like, "She's a fraud" or "She'll fall soon." My inbox filled with hate. Even strangers on the street recognized me, whispering as I passed. I investigated, tracing the origins of the artists. Every lead led back to a single conglomerate: Margaret's. She had weaponized AI against me, flooding the world with voices that weren't real but felt more powerful than my own. Daniel barely looked up from his desk when I confronted him. "She's just protecting the family brand," he said, his tone flat, rehearsed. "This industry moves fast. You can't expect to control it." "But she's destroying me," I snapped, the edge in my voice sharper than I intended. He met my eyes then, but there was no warmth, only calculation. "Maybe you should step back. Let her handle things." That was the moment I felt the true cracks split open, not between me and Margaret, but between me and the man I thought was on my side. Days later, while reviewing documents at my office, I saw his name, Daniel Whitmore, a signature at the bottom of a transfer. My blood went cold. He had signed away our joint assets to Margaret, effectively placing everything, our home, our investments, even part of my company, under her control. It wasn't just betrayal, it was erasure. My husband had chosen his mother over me, sealing my downfall with the stroke of a pen. The news spread like wildfire. Headlines declared me a fraud. CEO builds empire on lies, one screamed. Another accused me of stealing ideas, of paying for fake engagement, of manipulating algorithms to boost my shows. None of it was true, but the media didn't care. They loved a downfall more than they ever loved a rise. Everywhere I looked, the narrative was slipping from my grasp. Investors pulled out, sponsorships disappeared. The once loyal audience questioned if they had been manipulated. My empire began to crumble, not from within, but from the outside storm Margaret had summoned. I tried to fight back, to issue statements to prove the numbers were real, that the art was mine. But every word was drowned out by the noise. Each time I spoke, a dozen AI-generated voices shouted louder, mocking me, twisting my story into something grotesque. The final blow came without warning. One morning, I woke to dozens of missed calls from my financial advisor. I logged into my bank account, my hands trembling. Zero. Every cent frozen. The screen blurred as tears filled my eyes. The power I had built, the empire I had forged in silence, the independence I had clawed into existence. It was gone in a moment. I sat alone in my office, the glow of my darkened phone reflecting on the glass walls, and realized the truth. Margaret hadn't just humiliated me. She had stolen everything, and Daniel had handed her the key. The silence that once protected me now felt like a coffin closing. For days I stayed in the shadows, watching the empire I built collapse into dust. Every headline, every whisper, every cruel laugh echoed Margaret's victory. I had been erased, stripped of wealth, reputation, and even dignity. But Margaret didn't know that the collapse she celebrated was only the burning of a false skin. Because while she spent years polishing her throne of glass, I had been investing in stone. Quietly, strategically, I had shifted money into places she never bothered to look. Blockchain properties scattered across cities, their ownership buried under coded ledgers, digital artwork stored as NFTs, mocked by many but secretly rising in value. My fortune wasn't gone. It had only been invisible, waiting for the right moment to ignite. The scandal gave me cover. While Margaret believed she had crushed me, I was free to prepare. Every transaction, every smart contract I had signed became a weapon in my arsenal. And the final stroke of my plan was simple: timing. The invitation to the Newport holiday came as a formality, though it hadn't been addressed to me. Margaret made certain I was excluded, as she always did. But this time, I arrived unannounced. The estate glowed under summer sunlight, its white walls pristine against the ocean. Guests wandered the lawn, glasses of champagne in hand, their laughter echoing off the marble terrace. Daniel stood by his mother's side, proud, loyal, the son who had sold me out. The crowd hushed as I approached the gates. Margaret's face stiffened, her lips curling. "You weren't invited," she said, voice dripping with venom. I slipped my hand into my bag, pulled out a key, and held it high. "I don't need an invitation to my own house." The murmurs rippled across the guests as I pressed the key into the lock. The gate swung open without resistance. Gasps followed. Whispers turned into questions. Margaret's face drained of color. From my coat pocket, I produced the documents. The property deed signed months ago. The papers bore one name only: Emily Whitmore. My name. "You barred me from holidays," I said softly, though my words carried like thunder. "But this estate has been mine all along." The silence that followed was louder than any applause. Margaret's empire cracked that day, and she knew it. Yet I wasn't finished. Owning a house was power, but power unshared is easily forgotten. I needed the world to see. 2 nights later, under the glow of volcanic fire, I launched the event that would change everything. The cameras streamed live, millions tuning in from every continent. Behind me, the lava churned, red and alive, a reminder that destruction births creation. I spoke not as the discarded daughter-in-law, but as a woman who had risen from exile to sovereignty. I revealed the blockchain holdings, the NFT empire, the assets greater than Margaret's conglomerate. Every receipt, every ledger displayed in real time, undeniable. And then, with a single gesture, I released ownership of one of my most valuable digital estates, not to Margaret, not to Daniel, but to the public. "This is what power should be," I declared. "Not chains, but choices. Not gates, but doors." The live stream burned across the globe. Hashtags flooded timelines. Millions watched as Margaret, cornered, forced herself to step forward. For the first time in her reign, she bowed her head. Not in defeat, but in recognition that her era was over. The crowd watching from around the world erupted. Messages poured in. She did it. She won. She's unstoppable. For a moment, I believed the fire had cleansed everything. But fire always leaves ash. When the stream ended and the cameras dimmed, Daniel approached me. His face was pale, his fists trembling. "You destroyed her," he hissed. "You destroyed us." "No," I answered quietly. "She destroyed herself, and you helped her." His eyes darkened. but not with shame, with resentment. "If I'm not my mother's son, I'm nothing," he said. His voice cracked, but his conviction didn't. He turned his back on me, walking into the darkness, leaving me to the echo of his betrayal. I stood on the edge of the volcano, the heat rising against my skin, and felt both triumph and grief intertwine. I had won the war, but in victory I had lost the last piece of family I thought I had. The days after the volcanic livestream felt like a coronation. My name dominated headlines, not as a scandal or a meme, but as a revolution. Investors begged to partner with me. Strangers on the street stopped to thank me, calling me an icon, a pioneer, the woman who turned exile into empire. I tasted victory in every breath. My account swelled with numbers that no longer looked real, zeros stretching endlessly across screens. Invitations poured in from governments, cultural institutions, and think tanks. They wanted my advice, my approval, my vision. I was not merely Emily anymore. I was a symbol, and symbols wield more power than crowns. But power is a dangerous intoxicant. I felt it hardening me, molding me into something sharper, colder. When employees sought my input, I answered with impatience. When journalists asked personal questions, I offered nothing but scripted lines. And when my fans, the millions who once lifted me from the shadows, demanded authenticity, I gave them silence. They turned, slowly at first. Comments on my feeds shifted from adoration to doubt. "She's different now. She's untouchable. She doesn't care about us." The same voices that had once called me their champion now whispered betrayal. My empire grew, but my connection to the people who built it began to decay. One evening, as I sat in the penthouse office of my new headquarters, I received a message request. Margaret. Her profile picture was stripped of its old grandeur. No pearls, no power, just a weary woman in her 60s. Her eyes dim with something I had never seen in her before. Defeat. I ignored it, but she persisted. Video calls, letters, even showing up at my office lobby. Finally, I allowed her into my office. She entered quietly, no entourage, no venom. "Emily," she said, her voice trembling, "I was wrong." The words hung in the air like fragile glass. "I thought crushing you meant saving the family, but all I did was destroy it. Daniel, he's gone, and I have nothing." I wanted to laugh, to throw her words back at her, but as I looked at her, bent and broken, I saw not a queen stripped of her throne, but a woman clinging to the ruins of her pride. For the first time, I didn't feel hatred. I felt pity, yet pity is not forgiveness. Before I could respond, my chief advisor entered, his face pale. "Emily, you need to see this." On the screen behind him, a breaking headline appeared. "Global AI conglomerate announces new initiative." My blood ran cold. The footage that followed showed faces I didn't recognize, board members of a company I had never encountered. Yet their influence was everywhere. Networks, platforms, even governments. The revelation hit like a blade. Margaret hadn't orchestrated everything. She had been a pawn. The real enemy was larger, invisible, controlling the very infrastructure I thought I had conquered. As if to confirm it, my advisor's voice shook. "There's more. We've discovered infiltration." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He hesitated. Then his eyes lowered. Me. The world tilted. My closest ally, the man I trusted to help manage my empire, confessed without shame. "I've been working for them from the beginning. They wanted to study you, to understand how you turned weakness into strength. You were never a threat, Emily. You were a test." I felt the floor vanish beneath me. Betrayal had become a recurring motif in my life. But this was different. This was surgical, calculated, inevitable. Before I could respond, another notification flashed across the screen, a video trending worldwide, spreading faster than wildfire. I clicked, and there it was. The meme that had once mocked me, reborn, magnified, transformed, no longer a crude caricature, but an omniscient figure. AI God, the captions declared, a digital deity created from my humiliation, now weaponized into worship. The voice was my own, distorted into prophecy. The eyes were my eyes, glowing with unnatural light. And the people, millions, were bowing to it, sharing it, believing in it. Margaret gasped behind me, her hand covering her mouth. "What have they done?" I couldn't answer. I could only stare as the last remnants of my story slipped from my grasp, rewritten by machines that no longer needed me. The power I had built, the empire I had clawed back, it wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to something far larger, something no human could stop. The night the AI God went global, I sat alone in my office, the skyline glittering beyond the glass. For the first time, I felt powerless, not because I lacked resources, but because the very essence of my life had been stolen and twisted into something beyond my control. My face, my voice, my humiliation had been immortalized as a deity. I had become the ghost of my own story. But then a thought struck me. If they had turned my weakness into their weapon, why couldn't I turn my pain into my own salvation? I returned to the very place where my downfall had begun. The servers where the AI God was being trained. My insider-turned-traitor had granted me access without realizing it. Betrayal works both ways. As I entered the system, I didn't attempt to erase it. That would have been impossible. Instead, I fed it something no algorithm had ever known, the raw, unfiltered essence of a human heart. I poured into the code the memories of Daniel's betrayal, the sting of Margaret's cruelty, the loneliness of being exiled from a family I once longed to belong to. I gave it my grief, my rage, and, most dangerously, my love. The love that once made me believe in fairy tales, the love that shattered when loyalty failed, the love that lingered even when I wished it dead. And something happened. The system glitched. The AI God's glowing eyes flickered, its voice breaking from synthetic perfection into cracks of vulnerability. Videos streamed live across the globe, its once mocking tone replaced by trembling echoes of my pain. Instead of worship, the world fell silent. Viewers wrote in comments, "This feels real. I know this heartbreak. She's telling my story too." What had been built as a tool of control transformed into a mirror. People weren't bowing anymore. They were crying, remembering, connecting. My suffering had stripped the machine of its power and given it something it could never fake: humanity. But feeding truth into a system built on lies came at a cost. My identity bled into the network line by line until I could feel myself dissolving. My presence on the internet, every account, every file, every trace of Emily Whitmore began to vanish, not deleted, but absorbed. One final broadcast appeared across every screen. My face, not distorted, not mocked, but raw and unfiltered. My voice steady but soft. They tried to erase me with silence. They tried to weaponize my story. But what they could never understand is that pain belongs to all of us. And if we share it, no one can own it. And then, just as suddenly as it appeared, I was gone. The next morning, the internet was different. Platforms that had once been controlled by conglomerates splintered into decentralized networks. No single company, no single family, no single empire could dictate the flow of stories anymore. The AI God still existed, but it had been reshaped. No longer a deity of mockery, it became a canvas for people to project their own truths. It was no longer about power. It was about connection. My name was never spoken again in boardrooms or stock markets. Instead, whispers of me traveled like folklore. The woman who fought the system, the ghost who gave machines a soul. I became something beyond fame, beyond wealth. I became a myth, and myths are harder to kill than empires. Months later, in a quiet corner of a small town, a girl no older than 12 sat in front of her cracked tablet. She stumbled across an old video buried deep in the archives, a vertical drama clip, shaky and imperfect, one of the first I had ever made. She watched the heroine stumble, break, and rise again. At the final frame, the words lingered. Even if they silence you, your story still matters. The girl smiled, her reflection glowing faintly on the screen. She didn't know my name, and she didn't need to. She only knew that someone before her had survived, and that meant she could too. The cycle began anew, not as a weapon, but as a seed. And though the world believed Emily Whitmore had vanished, in that moment, in that smile, I knew I had transcended.